we've got a really great session for you today, all about captive portals, which I know is really a hot topic in this industry. So question of the day, do captive portals still have a place in the WLAN security landscape? And here to answer that question for us today is none other than Lee Badman, very good friend of the webinars here at 7 Signal and a definite fan favorite. So Lee, I'm going to hand over the controls to you so you can take it away.
All righty.
Yeah, Lee, I've been looking forward to this one for a while. I maybe a couple months ago shared my own take on captive portals, which I think you'll provide a good counterpoint to. So this will be
well, this could be interesting.
All angles of the issue.
We'll see if we remain friends, Jim. So hopefully you can see me.
Yep.
My screen. You're not going to see me. I'm in a suboptimal location to show you my pretty face, so you'll have to do without. I know that diminishes the value of the webinar, but it just is what it is today. So let's get into it. I usually skip through this, just who I am. The one thing I do want to point out, third bullet down, I'm old, been doing this for a while, and that has relevance when we talk about captive portals, because wireless as an industry is getting old, and captive portals have been along or have been around and along for the ride almost from day one. So the opinions and insight, if you can call it that I'm about to offer come from more than a couple of decades of doing this. So for what that's worth, just kind of paint the experience of where I come from. So on that topic, we're going to talk about the nowadays often maligned captive portal. Go back to that point I just made about me being a longtime resident of the WLAN professional world. So as a user, well, as a designer, a designer of wireless networks, I have both encouraged and discouraged the use of captive portals based on things that we're going to talk about. I've found them to be absolutely relevant and a great fit. I found them to also be an absolute nightmare for what people had in mind. So, you're not going to find straight up yes and no to anything that we talk about today, at least coming out of my mouth. As a longtime user of wireless, consumer, client, whatever you want to call it, I have been in situations where the captive portal is so horrible, you just don't use it. You bail out, use your data plan, do without, whatever. I've also gone through captive portals that are so smooth and so painless. It's like, okay, that was a non-event, off I go, and that was wonderful. Again, just giving you some of my own background. What we're going to talk about today is the portal still relevant as a building block in wireless networks. And, we're also going to kind of address the question, the unasked question, is it a global yes or no when we talk about captive portals? My assumption is that there's going to be a lot of opinions of those listening in. Some of those opinions might be generational, for lack of a better word. Some of you youngsters in the group might have different feelings on the topic than some of us who have been around a while, or depending on what industry you're in, you might have different feelings on it. But hopefully we'll touch on, some points that are relevant to everyone. And ideally, we'll provoke some thought and some good discussion. So I generally like to, look back at our roots a little bit before we look forward and talk about the topic of the day. There's usually value in that exercise. The third bullet down there is worth, again, pointing out. Captive portals have really been with us almost from day one. Usually it's associated with guest networks, generally Nothing is an absolute, but generally where you have a captive portal, it's something to do with the guest network. Way back when, if you go back far enough, captive portals were just fairly benign and expected and typical, and they didn't really create a lot of angst or debate. Way back when, it was totally reasonable to think about, before we let people on the network, we want to convey our terms and conditions. This is all kind of just part of wireless history. And the old no cat auth that we mentioned in the trivia question there. It just looks old. A couple of random screenshots grabbed off the network. You can do a lot with no cat auth. You can doctor up all of this, but it really was, at least in the early days. This is pre 802.1x. This is this is going back to 11 and 11B and early G. Your choices back then were typically let people on with PSK and no anything else, let people on with a captive portal that kind of maybe was tied to a back end, maybe it wasn't, or somehow get people to use VPN, whatever. I mean, there just wasn't a lot of options pre 802.1x, even in the enterprise. So way back when, even though I said it's usually associated with guest networks, it wasn't uncommon to find something like a no cat auth or its equivalent, not only just in the guest network, but also in the enterprise. So kind of getting in the Wayback Machine there. So let's bring it forward a little bit. I'm here to tell you that captive portals can be incredibly flexible. To the best of my knowledge, there is no such thing as a standard captive portal. There's no one design. There's certainly no standard that says this is how portals should be. A lot of variants. They can be as simple as just conveying of information, and I'm going to show you an example of that, further into the presentation. You don't sign in, you just have to acknowledge something. Somebody wants to message you something before they allow you onto their network, or they can be harvesting information, and lots of ways to do that, lots of things to tie you to. Unverified social login or unverified email accounts, or you can't get on until we text message you a password, or we have to sponsor you a ticket that somehow plays into the portal. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing the sign-in methods. On some of them, it's kind of the equivalent of a paywall. I'm going to give you this really good article, but you have to give me all your information so I can market to you after the fact. Maybe the paywall relies on or enforces valid email addresses or whatever. Maybe it doesn't. Portals can run the gamut. They can be, you can't fool them, or you can easily fool them. It's just a mixed bag. A lot of times, thankfully, I don't see this too much anymore, but there was a time when portals were a vehicle for advertising. Maybe we're going to give you terms and conditions, and also around the frame of the portal, around the outer real estate of the graphics, and just, all kinds of ugly marketing that you just ignore and click through. But somebody thought that, that was great. So, whether it was effective or not, that's its own question. But all of that being said, there is great flexibility, or can be great flexibility, in how portals are used and what they're used for, says I. So not only can they have great flexibility, they can also be utterly wretched, absolutely terrible. I personally am of the opinion that when portals started getting maligned and when they started getting trashed wholesale, Probably came from both the airport and the hotel industry, the hospitality industry. You know, I think those two markets have a lot to do with dissatisfaction. I'm sure that the other places have done portals, maybe ill thought out, and also contributed to that. But I think a lot of it did come from hotels. You know, it's not enough to go to a hotel and pay $8 for 5 crushed up chocolate chip cookies in the fridge mini bar thing. You know, let's also screw with you for different tiers of wireless access and make sure that that bottom tier that you still got to pay for doesn't work well at all. And maybe that'll entice you to spend more money on a higher tier or whatever. Just, you know, they can be absolutely terrible. Nobody's going to deny that. Not only in intent and purpose can they be terrible, you know, for the, you know, wheedling more money out of you. They can also be technically glitchy. You know, different browsers act different. They can have weird plugins to them. You know, somebody built it and maybe it worked on day one, maybe it didn't, and it just never got updated, never got fixed. And, you know, you go to a lot of these places and you bump into one of these terrible portals and you don't even know who to complain to. The front desk isn't going to care much because it comes out of corporate, if you will, and, you know, there's usually really no good way of complaining unless you go out of your way to write a letter or draft an email to somebody after you research who might give two figs at the corporate level for that organization, whatever. There's a lot of reasons why wretched portals kind of just live on and on and on. And again, I contributed to a couple of different industries. So they can be flexible and they can be terrible. So let's slow down a little bit. What determines whether a captive portal is warranted? Again, you know, we're doing wireless. This is the network. The network is used to give people access or to give devices access, and there's people behind those devices. So what determines in that equation, you know, whether we're ever going to use a portal? Well, a lot of it comes down to policy. This is one thing I say frequently in different webinars. Solutions enforce policy, solutions enforce organizational goals. So, you know, when we talk about policy, if your organizational policy says, well, we simply can't have wide open guest access, captive portal may be in order. You know, it falls under the list of things you might do that sorry, I'm listening to something outside of the room here. I got distracted. If policy says, you know, no wide open guests, so be it. And we may use a captive portal. If your organizational goals say, we're going to make every last bit of money, you know, every way we can, even if it annoys the hell out of people, you know, so be it as well. It's a choice that usually gets made, you know, way up high, and it is what it is. And a lot of that manifests when it comes time to do the captive portal, yes or no question. Like everything else, it's a balance of security versus user pain, and it's all looked at through the lens of those organizational goals. You know, and then the last bullet there, it's interesting if you don't want wide open access and you want people to have to do something before they get on your wireless network, how do you do it without a portal? There are options, but there aren't a lot of options, and the portal still has a lot of appeal, again, depending on how you answer the question form of the bullets above, that last one. So, you know, there are reasons people do them. There's also conflicting ideologies. On the left, you know, you got Bernie Sanders. I want it fast. I want it free. I don't want any speed bumps. Everybody deserves free wireless. Well, you know, as somebody who puts out wireless networks in different situations for different customers, I lean more towards the right speech bubble there. Don't owe you anything, really. Maybe by saying that, maybe that'll cost me customers, but at the same time, I don't believe that anybody is owed free wireless anywhere. I believe that it can be a selling point, it can be an added benefit, a value add, whatever you want to say. Go out to Silicon Valley and visit any of the big tech companies and see how friendly they are to wireless guests. I have never been to any of the big companies and just got on. It's always a ticket, it's always a captive portal, it's always something. And this is as recent as, pre-COVID, my last trip out there. It's all different depending on who you are and how you see your guests. The expectation of free Wi-Fi everywhere that kind of lives on that left speech bubble, to me, it's like, I want it free, but another spin on that is, if I don't like the way that you gave it to me, you're doing it wrong. I don't like the way you're presenting it, therefore you are technically wrong. When I hear that, I get a little hacked off as somebody who has to put out these systems too. It's like, every place isn't Disneyland, every place isn't Starbucks, and to think that every organization has the same framework guiding why it gives people access, I think that's a little, I don't know, limited or stunted. But again, just my opinion after somebody who's been around a while doing this. I have the notion that captive portals absolutely have a place. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of real world examples. This is a very simple one. The background here is it is a farm family. They have a cafe, and in their cafe, they were very excited to get Wi-Fi, make Wi-Fi available for their customers. But at the same time, the wonderful woman who runs all of this says, I just want people to know that, there's somebody behind it. We're making this available for their use. And I just want them to know that it's not a free for all. Maybe give the impression that, it's not anonymous. It's not just, have at it and take it for granted. She wanted people to know, you're at my place using my wireless. Please enjoy it and please use it responsibly. And it's like, okay, this is your facility. You absolutely can do that. And at the same time, she doesn't want to know who anybody is. She doesn't want to gather any information. Just a simple conveyance of, whatever this sentiment is. Call it very low intensity terms and conditions. Whatever you want to call what you're looking at, that was her choice, and she was pretty strong-minded about it, and so be it. The other part of it is people go to their cafe more for the food than they do for the wireless. That was another part. If people are coming in just to use the wireless, maybe they're not so welcome. It's not the library. It's still a business. So, nope, I'm sorry about that. Let's see if I can go back. The second example, I can't show you, but I can talk to you about it. In my day job on the big wireless network that I run, we have a captive portal for our wireless guests. You hit an SSID that is very much aimed at guests because it's in the name, it's in the SSID. You click on it, captive portal opens up, you put in your phone number, and you are immediately texted a password through the magic of Twilio integration on the back end. And that is our guest service. It never fails. It's very reliable. It's tested often. It's quite robust. It has no rate limiting. But at the same time, you need to put in a phone number. That wasn't my decision. I am the system designer. I'm the system implementer. I do all the troubleshooting, or me and my team members. But I put the whole mess together. But I didn't make the decision that that requirement for a phone number was something that we were going to work on. That came from the C-levels. That came from our CIO. That came from our security officer. They felt that we needed some easily spoofable way of tracking people when the worst happens and when there's something that, subpoena level trouble. And unfortunately, we have that policy because we've needed it at least once or twice through the decades that I've been involved there. And again, that's a C-level decision. We want it, make it happen. You can advise that, well, people aren't going to like it, and here's why. And the answer still is, well, this is our policy. This is what our legal team advises, whatever. So, I'm showing you the very simple of the Bailiwick Cafe, and I'm telling you about the more complicated, you know, of the day job and the bigger network. Two different philosophies, two different reasons for doing portals, two different types of portal operation. One is a hell of a lot more involved on the back end, and one is just simple conveying of graphics, but both of them come down to organizational policy and the security, goals, the security requirements defined by somebody other than the person doing the network. So hopefully I didn't beleaguer those points too much, but I think they're important to realize. I hear this one quite a lot, but such and such place doesn't use a portal. Disney, I think, is one example I hear a lot. Disney doesn't do it. Why would you do it? Well, we're not Disney. How's that? Like I said, go out to Silicon Valley, go to Cisco, go to HP. Different businesses have different definition of what a guest is when you're on premise. If you go to 10 different environments, chances are you're going to see at least 5 different definitions of what a guest is. Yes, you're in my lobby or my waiting room. You are my guest. Use the Wi-Fi. But what that means technically, and when it integrates with my security policies, is going to vary greatly. Some places have intellectual property to worry about, whatever the reasons are for slicing the guest definition onion differently are, that is reality. Not every business sees guests the same way. Hotels want to monetize you. Disney just wants you to be whatever. They make up for it someplace else. It's free Wi-Fi, but you're going to spend, $75 on a hamburger. So was the Wi-Fi really free? It's all very interesting. And it's all very non-yes or no in the grand scheme. So you really have to look at each situation differently. As I said, it comes down to policy, business goals. Certainly not all guest Wi-Fi is created equal, and that even comes down to how vendors do it. When we, during the day job, or at the day job, when we set out to try to do guest wireless the way we needed it on vendor A, our incumbent wireless vendor, they could not even get close to it. So we use vendor A for Wi-Fi, and we use vendor B for the back end, WLAN vendor B for the back end mechanics of the wireless captive portal that we use. So what's the difference? Well, somebody at vendor A has their vision of what all Wi-Fi guests should be, the whole range of guest stuff. And vendor B obviously sees it differently with a lot more flexibility and a lot more granularity. So not only are the policies that go into putting a portal solution together, a lot of times the mechanics are different. What the vendors give you to work with are different. And through the years, I found myself very unhappy with the built-in and looking for specialty products that could do nothing but the portal part for what a given customer needed. It's all kind of messy. Whether you use the portal or not, it's up to you. If you don't like, Boingo or whatever the heck it is at the airport, I haven't flown in a while, so if I got that wrong, forgive me. If you don't like you don't have to proceed. Even if you feel like your back's against the wall and you absolutely need to, blah, 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 it's still a choice whether you proceed through, use the portal, let yourself, get monetized, whatever. All of it is a choice. And nowadays with personal hotspots or even, unlimited data plans and higher functioning phones, whether you choose to use the guest Wi-Fi or not, kind of becomes maybe a little more irrelevant depending on how you're equipped personally. But one thing, like I said, the whole notion of, you're not doing Wi-Fi the way I want you to do it, even though it's coming out of your pocket and your APs. The only thing I can say to that to anybody is don't be a whiner. And let's see if Jim is going to shellac me for that later. So what if you do opt to use captive portals? Okay, this gets into probably the less sunny side of it. As I mentioned on the hotel and the airport stuff, a lot of them suck. They've always sucked. Probably 5 years from now, they'll suck. It was never built right. Nobody's testing them. There's no way to complain about them. That isn't who you want to be if you opt to use a captive portal. Boy, make sure the thing works the way it's supposed to work, and make sure you test it frequently, and hopefully whoever is behind the code of the portal is staying up on browser changes and at least keeping their service that you're probably buying updated. If you're using open source, it's still up to you to make it functional and relevant. Absolutely, you need to know that the portal will probably cause problems with your secure wireless or your secure web sessions. It's just going to break things and put up the cert errors or specific other errors. One thing I hear a lot about this particular point, I hear people say, well, if they just get used to clicking the certificates because your portal is breaking, that's not good. You're training people to do bad wireless behaviors. And all I can say is that the industry is so all over the place with things that don't line up and they aren't perfect. That's about the least of my worry, personally. You might not agree, but I don't care if somebody has to click a cert, click past a cert error or something. To me, like I say, we're still living in a very imperfect world, and that's about the least of my concerns, although I do get the concern with it. Portals can absolutely be faked. It's one of those features that's built into the Pineapple, the Pineapple hacking device, and you can get it with the, thinking of the other suite of wireless dirty tricks there. It's just not coming to mind.
Kali Linux, perhaps.
Oh, thank you, exactly. Kali Linux, and there are others. It's very easy to maybe not exactly replicate every portal depending on how they're built, but you can certainly scrape a couple of logos off of somebody's website, build your own portal, and make it feel legitimate enough as part of certain wireless attacks. Absolutely a fact of life. But at the same time, I can do other things even on 802.1x networks. I can pop up an exact same SSID with a good strong signal and do things that have nothing to do with the way I want people to authenticate and still make you fall for my dirty trick. So it's not like this is unique to portals, but portals are perhaps the graphics involved perhaps make it a little more easy to trick people. Then there is the reality that some apps want to work as soon as they hit the wireless. They want to work before any browsers are opened and before somebody logs into that portal. That may or may not be something you care about. And again, it goes back to, how much pain do I want to inflict on people versus what I want them to be able to do once they're on the wireless. It's not a universal answer. There are going to be places that truly don't care that your app doesn't connect until you log in, because they see you differently as a guest than other environments. But regardless of all of that, if you're doing the captive portal thing, you really need to understand what it impacts, accept what it impacts, understand why people might complain, and be able to tell the difference between just somebody ranting because they don't like the way you put it out there versus a legitimate trouble ticket. And that can be kind of hard, depending on how you're doing things. But at the same time, you smelt it, you dealt it, or you dealt it, you, whatever the expression is, you built it, you live with it, you made your bed, lie in it, whatever. If you opt to use the portal, you need to understand what it looks like, what it feels like, what people like about it, what they don't like about it. That's all on you when you opt to use it. And my final word on it before we get into some discussion is I got a feeling that there's going to be some. My final thought on it, as much as I do see the irritation when it comes to using portals, especially poorly thought out portals, and as much as I see the need for them in certain situations and why people still want to use them regardless of sometimes quirkiness or whatever, I will say that one thing that I think almost everybody can agree on, the monetization aspect of it. And it's not even so much when I say that, I guess I should split some hairs too. You go into a supermarket, you go into a big box store, they have a network. If you want to be in their club and get discounts and maybe use their store navigation, whatever, all of that, yes, you are being monetized, whether you realize it or not. But maybe it's a monetization that you like or that you've agreed to and you find value in it, therefore you don't mind sharing your data and being used in that way in return for what you get out of the relationship with the free Wi-Fi and any discounts or whatever. The monetization that I'm saying that nobody likes is just the exorbitant prices to use basic cheap Wi-Fi, and you've just paid me $20 and the experience sucks and there's nobody that you can talk to. I'm talking about the horrible, really ill thought out being monetized is the part that's just like, I think universally drives everybody nuts. And I'm assuming that I'm not alone in saying I've seen enough of those it pushes a hot button when you realize that you're about to get into one of them, and just, makes me just not even want to entertain using that particular portal. But with that, see if I got any voice left. With that, covered a lot of ground on the whys and the wheres and what breaks. And on this particular topic, I absolutely did want to make sure that we've got a few minutes left for discussion. So let's
Great.
go there.
Thanks, Lee. And I want to invite everybody in the audience with a question. Drop it in the questions pane, and we'll get Lee's take on things. I like what you said at the end there about the hiccups around HTTPS and understanding why some users may complain. That was actually one of the focuses of my previous webinar on Captive Portal. So if you're wondering what makes users complain, I walk through some of those things there. But I think a lot of it, agree with some of the trends you identified. But just the changes in security, information security since the early days of Wi-Fi, when all of our web traffic was HTTP. Back in those days, a captive portal had a really simple thing to do: intercept the traffic, show a different, give a different DNS response, or just spoof, send different HTML back, and it worked pretty well. But these days, with HTTPS, with TLS 1.2, 1.3, with DNS over HTTPS, it's much harder for that to work. So I think sometimes that's one of the causes of an increase in user complaints and pain.
Yeah, I fully agree, and it does kind of suck. I mean, there's actually another location where I use it, and I'm sure I'm not alone. We have 802.1x onboarding, and that also requires a portal to get you started, and there's only so much you can do to keep up with the browsers. Trying to increase the security of the sessions and all of that before that starts to feel a little bit wonky, but there's only so many ways you can get from point A to point B as well, and especially when you're dealing with non-managed machines like you're going to get on guest networks or people just coming onto your network or whatever, and it's messy. There's a lot of things that I would say, boy, wouldn't it be nice if, but that if just isn't there, and I think we're going to be stuck with a lot of those frustrations for at least for a few years.
Yeah, and just looking at some questions here as they come in. Comment from Anders. He says, actually, the Wireless Broadband Alliance has some guidelines around captive portals. So I'll drop that link in the chat so everybody can have a look at what the WBA recommends around captive portals.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anders.
That's fascinating. That'd definitely be one to look at. And of course, they're completely irrelevant, but still. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm imagining the Wideband Alliance.
That is the Wireless Broadband Alliance.
Oh, I'm sorry. So who did they are more of a cellular ISP? What would that be aimed at? It certainly doesn't sound like Wi-Fi. It sounds like somebody other than the Wi-Fi Alliance. I'm just trying to picture who their target market might be just based on the name.
Yeah, I think they're more in the carrier Wi-Fi market, more representative of what the larger ISPs are doing with Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and I'm not trashing Anders I'm not trashing anything about that. I'm just thinking out loud about who they're attached to out in the industry.
Question here from Robert. Interesting question. He says, what is the best captive portal that is secure, reliable, and free? I'm not sure you can get all three of those in one. What do you think, Lee?
Pineapple.
Pineapple?
No, I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because I haven't pursued anything that's open source. Portals that I have known and loved through the years. BlueSocket, their old BlueSocket gateways before they were bought by, good goodness, I'm sorry, I'm seeing the name in my mind. BlueSocket was bought by somebody. It starts with an A, I think. And they are not, their gateways don't exist anymore, but their gateways had a fantastic portal.
Oh, Adtran.
Adtran, thank you. Yep. Their gateways had a fantastic portal, very flexible, simple, super reliable, did all kinds of stuff. Nowadays, I have found that even in like a non-Aruba environment, an Aruba controller and the ClearPass can be bought relatively inexpensive for a large environment for just guest access purposes and give you all kinds of flexibility. What I'm seeing in the Mist that's built in is very promising. Not trying to promote any vendor over another. I'm just going back to the question. And in my world, I haven't really had to try to bolt up anything free to an enterprise solution. I do know that there are still companies like Tenaza out of Italy. They're doing the cafe model thing, and depending on your number of APs, they've actually got a decent captive portal. So it all depends on what your use case is. When you say free, I mean, sometimes it's like, okay, I bought the enterprise system and this is what it has built in. Is that free? Or are you looking to put together, a bunch of ubiquity access points and add something on that's free? So there's some nuance there too, but I don't have a good answer as the question is asked and what I think the spirit of the question is. Are you aware of any, Jim?
Well, it depends on, security in terms of, like protocol level security. Usually don't think of captive portals as really helping much there. But I think maybe the one exception to look into is what Passpoint is doing with the online sign-up feature that's been added to that. The client support isn't quite there yet, but if you just Google, Passpoint online sign-up, see some interesting things around, a drive to do something with, higher levels of, layer 2 security and agreed upon standards, and hopefully a better future for more reliable and secure captive portals that way. But Passpoint's been around for a long time, and it's been pretty slow to be deployed anywhere outside of airports, in my experience.
No, I would agree.
Interesting question here from Bill. He says, and maybe you can share your experience with this, Lee. He says, if a portal requires a mobile number, doesn't that expose the owner of the network to added personal liability if the mobile information attributed to a person is compromised? So I don't know the answer to that. That's a legal liability question. But Lee, I'm just curious if, in your experience, you've seen that question tackled.
I have not, actually. It's a great question. I'm trying to, being put on the spot, I'll just rapidly think out loud. So, somebody puts in their cell phone number and they get texted back a password. A cell phone number now lives in various logs. So that, how is it going to be, what in the logs? So I guess your logs have to be secured, I guess, to prevent what the question is implying might happen. And then the other part of what I'm thinking is we put our phone numbers, and again, when you say mobile information, I'm specifically talking phone number and nothing else.
Right.
In my scenario, we put our numbers out so freaking many places. How would you ever know that it came from there if something were to happen? And what can happen just based on somebody having your phone number? I'd have to give it some thought. I just don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer to even judge whether it's a valid question, and that's not slamming the asker of the question at all. I'm just thinking, like I said, we put our numbers out there in so many places. What is the risk for asking people for their number when their numbers go everywhere anyways?
Yeah, it's a really good question, I think, because it really illustrates how it's a much bigger decision, and the policy around it isn't just a technology decision. It's about legal liability and compliance and risk, and things that for the network engineers out there are above our pay grade.
I will say, kind of related to that, one thing that always really bothered me was the whole OAuth framework. And I log in with my Facebook account or whatever just to get a free ice cream or 10% off my drinks at some restaurant. And in return, the fine print and everything I've given them, my entire list of everybody I know on Facebook and all of their information. Granted, all of that can be gotten other ways, but it just seems like a pretty unholy trade. You know, here's your free one scoop, and thank you for thousands and thousands and thousands of data points on you and other people. In exchange, that one always kind of bothered me.
Me too. Yeah.
Especially with the murky terms and conditions.
And Lee, maybe just one last question here from Jason, and he asked, should a captive portal use HTTP or HTTPS redirection?
Am I being tricked? Is this a trap?
Well, you know, they can be configured to use one or both.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thanks for coming. No, you know, I'm feeling kind of dim in the brain on this. I mean, if you can do it with HTTPS, and I'm trying to think of how I do it in the problems I've had with both of the products that we use for the various enterprise captive portal that we do use. And I'm just trying to think of, have we been able to do successfully HTTPS or not? And without looking, I just do not remember. But I mean, the short Pollyanna answer, anything you can do with HTTPS is desirable, but you may not be able to say only HTTPS, and you have to decide if that's something that you can live with and you can ask people to live with.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, if you get on the road for HTTPS, that's one of the things you want to test quite frequently as browsers change, as clients change, and also make sure you're using valid, trusted certs on your portal as well, just to give them the best chance of having a good experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, that is the whole cert thing. Great to use the self-signed and put, you know, 20-year expirations on them, but it really doesn't help the users. So, you know, you have to be careful where you're doing that nonsense, and real certs from, you know, trusted authorities and all of that do have a absolute place in the conversation.